Katrina, and I struggled with the use of drugs and alcohol for many years. I grew up in a military family. My father was in the Army for 25 years. As a child, I was a very loving child, very caring, very giving, and everything I did, I excelled in, whether it was sports, music, education. I gave my best in all that I did. My father retired from the military in 2000 from West Point, and we moved to Glens Falls. I was 15 years old at that point, and I had a hard time finding any group that I fit in. I was playing soccer still, I was still playing the drums, but I just didn't feel like I had belonged. I started using drugs and alcohol and found the party scene. I felt more accepted at that point. I partied heavily during school, the weekends. I smoked pot and I drank, and I dabbled into ecstasy and cocaine. When I was 16, I found out that I was pregnant for my son Hunter, who is now 13, and I stopped using at that point throughout my pregnancy. After he was born, I picked back up. I started using again. This time, I got more heavily into cocaine and started down a very dangerous path with that. I was traveling to and from New York City to pick up drugs and bring them back to the area. I hung out with a lot of users and dealers, and my role in that was to simply use the use of cocaine. I was pulled over and arrested with possession with intent to sell when I was 19 years old. I was sentenced to state prison, and I did a shock incarceration camp at that point. When I came home, I put down the use of drugs and alcohol for a time being, and I got my cosmetology license. I met a man that I married and had 2 more children with. We had a home, and I felt that at that point society was giving me this reassurance that I guess I felt that I needed, because I was lacking so much spiritually. And you can only have so much reassurance from society and reassurance from other people until that hole is empty again. I had 2 more children in my early 20s, Hayden and Harper, who's now 8 and 6. And the use picked up again shortly after they were born. Alcohol and pills at that point. When I was pregnant for Harper, I fell down a flight of stairs holding Hayden, and I had to walk with a walker for 6 months. And I had MRIs done, and after she was born, and the use of opiates picked up from there. And that's when my life started spiraling out of control, or what I thought was out of control. I was using opiates on a regular basis. I had gotten to this point where I had left my husband, and I had an apartment with me and my 3 children. And I had gotten to this point where it was, if I was not using, I could not take care of my children. So I had mapped out my addiction so perfectly that I had pills set up for every day of the week. And without those pills, I felt at that moment that I couldn't manage, I couldn't take care of these children like they deserved to be taken care of. Throughout my addiction and throughout that, I started use of heroin as well. When the pills were gone, the heroin was involved, and I met people that that condoned that behavior and that enabled that behavior. I stayed away from my family, who wanted to help and who wanted to share the word of God, and I shut all of that out because of all the guilt and shame. I found out in 2012, as I got a phone call from the doctors, that I was positive for hepatitis C. At that point, my drug use picked up more. I started treatments for hepatitis C in 2012, and I was sticking a needle in my arm and giving myself a shot in the stomach for the medicine that I needed for that. And I was just at such a dark and lonely place. I had stories from my family of how this could happen and, how I could have contracted it from somebody else. And I had made up so many lies, lie after lie, to try to hide that addiction and maintain this life that I had it all together. Inside, I was completely broken, but on the outside, it was hard to tell. I overdosed in 2012 as well. It was as soon as there was like a 12-week treatment for the hepatitis C, and I had overdosed as soon as those treatments were done, and my children were removed from my care and put into foster care with their grandmother. At that point in my life, I remember begging for God to take my life. As a child, I was planted this seed of God and of Jesus and His love for us. And at that time in my life, I felt that He had abandoned me. I felt that He walked out on me and my children. And I felt that there was nothing that at this point that I could do to get that love back, because I was living in such sin. After my overdose, I was seeing the children on a regular basis through foster care and through their grandmother. And the times that I would go and see them, I would have to take a drug test. And I was still actively using. I had no self-identity after these children were removed. For so many years, that's all I had was, being Hunter, Hayden, and Harper's mom. I had no self-identity of who the real Katrina was and what I was here for, other than being their mother. I was seeing the children once a week at that point, and I remember leaving each time being real sarcastic towards God, real sarcastic towards the Lord, saying, "Oh yeah, you love me a lot." I would bring fake urine into these sessions so that I could see these children. And I remember the last time that I went in, before I went into a rehab, I had tried to see them. And I was driving all over town like a mad woman, trying to find fake urine that they sell at these smoke shops. And by the time I got up there, I was 5 minutes late, and the guy denied my visit. And it was at that point when I just got on my knees and begged for God to take my life, just take my life, because there was no sense in me living. There was no sense in me moving forward. I could see no light. It was just darkness. And if I had the courage to, pull a trigger, I probably would have during that time, because death seemed so much more bearable than living. I had went into a rehab after that, and it went up to St. Joe's, and there was a family program that your family is supposed to attend, and my mother, the faithful woman that she is to God and to myself, attended it. And this counselor, I was still in complete denial when I went up there. I was still trying to hide the guilt and hide the shame, still telling everybody that everybody else was crazy. It was not me. I was not crazy. And I never thought that this could happen to me. I came from a good home, a home that was secure, that went to church, that, I did so well as a child. I was just this happy, loving child. The thought of me being an addict and putting a needle in my arm, that it couldn't happen to my family. It couldn't happen to me. And I was very confused. So I was still denial, in complete denial going up there. It wasn't until this family session that, I had said, well, my father's not going to come up here. He won't put down the drink for longer than 2 days to come see me. And she looked at me and she was like, Katrina, you did the same thing to your children. You couldn't put the drug down for long enough to keep them. And that's when I knew that there was a problem, and that I had a problem, and that I wanted to fix it. And I remember walking into the sanctuary that they had up there for weeks at a time, and every time I walked in, I would cry. I would just bawl and pray and pray and pray and ask God that, He would take a second look at my life. I didn't at that point realize that God was turning this mess into a masterpiece. I had no sense of, at that point, like what God was doing at all in my life. I had no sense of what God was doing in my life. And I remember just praying and praying, that He opened my eyes. When I was in St. Joe's, I got a card from my grandmother, and she had put the story of Job and how he was just this wealthy man that had everything and had this impeccable faith in the Lord. And Satan said, well, the only reason he has this faith is because, you have your protection around him. Let me get control of the situation and he'll curse you to your face. And I was so inspired by that story, because after that man, he lost everything that he had. His children lost their health. It made me realize how blessed I was, that God was just trying to show me, how much He cared. And watching Him work in my life, and not only my life, but my mother's life and my children's life. I had went home from St. Joe's and into a halfway house and then a supportive living program. And meanwhile, during this time, continuing growing in the Lord, and, not being accepting that, I may not understand where this is all going, but having that faith that God is doing exactly what He wants to do and what He believes is best for my life. God has restored relationships with my family that were non-existent. My sister, I can say, is my best friend today, and we had a non-existent relationship. The relationship with my mother, He restored an amazing relationship with these children, and has not only brought me closer, but has brought them closer to the Lord as well. He has restored my health. I go to the doctors today, and I'm not positive for hepatitis C, and nobody can tell me that is anything but God's grace and God's mercy on me and His loving care, because miracles like that just don't come about unless they're from the Lord, and I do believe that. I try to, on a daily basis, walk with the Lord and give my will over, and there's days that I struggle, that I question, what am I here for, and what do you want from me, and what can I do with my story, and what can I do to better myself with my walk with the Lord. And I honestly just take it one day at a time, giving my will over on a regular basis, and giving my life over, giving my children's life over. I mean, to know that God loves my children more than I do is beautiful in itself. And I know that I have a lot of growing to do.